those who didn't manage to participate live will have possibility to watch it afterwards. Yeah, and so our working lecture today will be English, but if it's easier for you, for example, asking questions in written or in spoken, in Latvian or Russian or Hebrew, obviously Dr. Falkov speaks also these languages. I don't know to what extent his knowledge of Polish and German will be most useful here, but also that's an option, I guess. So without any more useless talk, I'm giving you the floor and the virtual mic to Yaakov. Hi, welcome to Riga, and the floor is yours.
Okay, hi, good evening. Thank you very much, Ilya. Thank you very much, Dr. Svetlana Pogodina, my colleague, for arranging this meeting. I'm very excited to be here with you today. And actually, let's start with a talk. First of all, I have to stress or to admit that this is only an initial outcome of my first or my current research, or part of my research. And despite the fact that I already published an article in Hebrew about this topic, we as a community of historians, of researchers, will still have lots of work to do in order to be able to somehow complete this research on this topic. And I would like to start from stressing the fact that it has been a long, very long journey to me since the first time I encountered this subject many, many years ago. Actually, I think somewhere in 2004, when I visited Riga, and I bought this very interesting book written in Latvian and edited by a colleague of mine, via Kanepe, which speaks about the destinies of officers of the Latvian security and intelligence services, and mainly the political department, which was the main service by this time in Latvia during the interwar period, which means the period between the two world wars. And the book has a very nice, but unfortunately tiny, very small chapter dedicated to the activity of the political department vis-a-vis the local Jewish community. And it excited me very much on the one hand. On the other hand, it actually gave me an idea to try and to go to the archive, to the Latvian archive, and to try to find there the sources of this chapter, the real documents which served a basis for this publication. And unfortunately, again, it took me almost 2 decades until I was able actually to fulfill this wish and to come to the Latvian state archives, historical archives, as you can see here. And probably most of you are very well accustomed with this place, which is amazing. And I used to work there for my first research, for my PhD, which Ilya already mentioned, and it is dedicated to the Soviet partisan movement and specifically to its intelligence activity. I'm always trying to see where to find possible new aspects of historical events through the eyes of different intelligence and security services. Mainly, I wrote about the Soviet security services and, as I said, the intelligence activity or service of the Soviet partisan movement. And just recently, I've published another book which speaks about the Polish intelligence and security services during the Second World War. But here, as I said, I just last year in August, I think, about half a year ago, I finally was able to come to the Latvian State Archives to look for these specific documents which were produced by the state political department between the two world wars. And here is the file. As you can see here, I made these photos for you, specifically for the future lecture. And unfortunately to us, only one such file related to the activity of the political department vis-a-vis the Jewish community in Latvia survived until today. I guess that there were much more, since the activity lasted many years, at least since the mid-20s and until the occupation of the Latvian Republic by the Soviets in June 1940. But as I said, unfortunately, all we have today is only this specific file, which nonetheless is completely amazing, as I will try to convince you immediately. So let's start. And by the way, I already told you that I've published in the meantime a short article in this Israeli journal called Ha'uma, the nation. And here the thanks goes to my friend and colleague Yossi A. Achimer, the editor of this publication, of this journal, who actually allowed me to publish the first initial outcomes of my this discussed research. So it already exists in Hebrew, but still not in Latvian or other languages. Probably and hopefully this will be possible in the future. So we will start from the first description of the Latvian political department, which was a very interesting organization. And it existed, as I already said, in the interwar period, after being established in the beginning, shortly after the establishment of the Latvian state, after the first, World War, and it was established in the beginning of 1920s. And its headquarters had been located in this very nice, beautiful house on, as you can see, Alberta Street in Riga, which is in turn located in a very nice district of Riga, where many embassies were located then and still are located today. And the building itself was built by a very famous architecture named Michael Eisenstein. And here, from the very beginning of the process, the political department was sitting and acting. And he had, from the very beginning, since the Latvian state was and still located close to the Russian border, its security service had multiple very important functions, and first of all, of course, struggling the encroachment of the Soviet intelligence, of the Soviet propaganda activities. And here I put the picture of the Soviet embassy, which was located in the same place where today the Russian embassy is located, on Kalpaka Boulevard, again in the center of the city of Riga. And the Soviets were handling their network of spies, local spies, Russians and Latvians and Jews all across the country, and specifically, of course, in the capital. But there were also multiple pro-Soviet organizations, and of course, the quite big Russian community. Many Russians used to live in Latvia prior to the establishment of the independent state. And also many of them came to Latvia after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia itself. So the community was quite big, and at least some of its members had some ties with the Soviet embassy and also, of course, of the Soviet intelligence. But there were also, as you can see here, the Germans. The Germans became they were very active in this specific region before the First World War and during the First World War, as we know, and also during the interwar period, and especially after the Nazis came to the power in Germany in 1933. So the location, the very proximity of the Latvian state in Riga to the Soviet border, as I said, made this place very attractive to them. And they also, as the Russians, exactly as the Russians, they were their spies were sitting in the German embassy and handling networks of their own local spies and gathering information about the Soviets, but also about the British. And the British were very much active, and the Swedish intelligence also were very much active in Riga. So Riga became actually a kind of espionage hub in the interwar period. So the Latvian security service, the political directorate, became quite busy with struggling different foreign intelligence services, and especially, as I said, especially, of course, the Soviets. And as you can see here, I put you two very interesting pictures. The first one is of the Soviet GPU or GPU defector called Nikitin. I wasn't able to establish his real name. He appears in the publications of this time as Nikitin, and also in the book of Kanepe, which I mentioned earlier. And he escaped to Latvia, as you can see here, in 1927. And also another very interesting story was of a very high positioned agent of a political department within the local Latvian Communist Party. And he was handled there for quite a long period of time and was only discovered after the Russians, the Soviet, occupied Latvia in the summer of 1940. But among all this activity, which was quite busy also without the Jews, as we saw just recently, also arose this specific subject, which is the core issue of our today's meeting. And actually, we are talking about, as I said, in 1933, the Nazis came to power in Germany and immediately started anti-Jewish repressions across their country. And one of the key issues or key avenues of their activity against the Jews was the boycotting of Jewish businesses, of a Jewish trade in Germany. And as you can see here, a few pictures which actually deliver the atmosphere of this time in Germany, of this persecution of the local German Jewish population. And of course, very quickly, different Jewish international organizations organized an anti-boycott against the German goods across the globe, and especially, of course, in Europe and the United States, where this anti-boycott, this measure proved very powerful. And it also was so powerful because Mr. Vladimir Zev Jabotinsky, the leader of the so-called revisionist movement within the world Zionist movement, actually supported the boycott. He saw the activity of the new German government, as you can see here, as actually an attempt to annihilate the German Jewry and its entire life in the German country. And he wrote and spoke about the necessity of organizing an anti-boycott, as I already said. And he actually believed that this was the only way to compel the Germans to leave the German jury, the German Jewish community alone, to let them live and not to persecute them. So here, as you can see, he wrote extensively in Russian, which was his native language, mother tongue, so-called, and also, of course, in Yiddish and in Hebrew. And he traveled a lot across different countries in Europe and also, of course, in Palestine, in North America. And he spoke enthusiastically about this anti-boycott. So the organization of Beitar, which was the youth movement of this revisionist Zionist movement, supported the boycott very much with all means which were or stood at its disposal. And of course, we have to mention that the Beitar movement was established in the early 20s in Riga. Jabotinsky came personally to Riga a few times. He visited in, as you can see, 1923 and also later, and he gave lectures across the country. And so from the beginning, from its very beginning, this Beitar movement established its headquarters in Riga. Later on, it was relocated to Warsaw, to Poland, but in the 20s or throughout the 20s, it set in Riga. And of course, after the relocation to Poland, still it maintained, had very powerful branches, not only in Riga, but also in other places, multiple branches, also in other places across the Latvian state. And since, as I said, the Beitarists or the members of this organization supported the boycott, the anti-boycott against the German goods in Latvia, it quite quickly became a very powerful tool against the German economy. By the way, as you can see, when I visited Riga the last time in last August, I went to this address, mentioned this address, I found it in the internal correspondence of the Beitar movement in the so-called Jabotinsky archive in Israel, in Tel Aviv. I was looking for the specific address in an attempt to find out the address, the location of the headquarters, Beitar headquarters in Riga. So as you can see here, they wrote by themselves in Latvian, Riga Noliktavas Iela number 5, Noliktavas street number 5. So I went to the same Noliktavas street, which has the same name until today. And I found this building. Later on, as I understood, they moved to, in the 30s already, they moved to another location in Riga. But by this time, they still were located here in Noliktavas 5. So I filmed or pictured this place, unfortunately only in night. That was the only free time I had to make picture. But still, you can see it. It is a very nice building which exists until today. And speaking about the boycott and going back to the file, to the archival file that I've already showed you earlier, one of the first things that I found there was this poster in Latvian and Yiddish that as far as I understand, boycott activists handed out, spread at the entrances to cinemas in Latvia in 1933, 1944. And here this poster announces that actually they are going to see a German film, a German movie, and they were forewarned by the boycott organizers not to do this, not to enter the place. And the outcome of this Jewish, but by the way, other also other non-Jewish organizations, like some of them were Russian organizations, some of them were social democrats. They supported this initiative by the Jewish community in Latvia. And very quickly, the Germans realized, to their surprise, that not only, of course, in Latvia, but in other places, Jewish and non-Jewish organizations were trying to promote this anti-boycott and against the Third Reich and its economy. And it proved quite successful, quite painful for the Germans, for the German economy. And the Germans, from their side, were monitoring very close this development, and especially in Latvia, and since the local boycott was very good organized, very well organized, and they declared actually their anti-measure by declaring, as you can see here, a boycott prohibition of import of the Latvian butter to Germany. And this step, this act, proved in turn very painful for the Latvian economy, since the butter, but by this time, was one of the main goods that the Latvian state, the Latvian agriculture, was able to export abroad, and the Latvian state was doing this quite extensively. So the local peasants started complaining to the government about this very sad outcome of German countermeasures, and they, as far as I understand, they asked the government to do something with the Jewish boycott against Germany in order to be able to put an end on the German countermeasures against the Latvian economy. And it was at this specific stage that actually the political department entered the picture. And it was, as far as I understood, it was ordered by the highest state authorities to go and to check the entire matter. And by this time, we can see in this specific archival file a collection of documents, as you can see here, different reports dedicated to this boycott activity. There was, probably I haven't said that, but there was a boycott committee established in Riga, and it was checking different businesses, Jewish businesses in Latvia, who were connected to their counterparts in Germany, and they were prohibiting different ties with the German economy and export and import to Germany and from Germany. So this committee became very, very active and quite powerful, at least among the members of the Jewish community in Latvia. So here, for example, you can see an agent's report about the debate held in Riga, in Latvia, about the boycott outside Latvia, its features and outcomes. Another example is here, again, an agent's report about one of the boycott's activists named Isaac Kramers, of course, a Jew, a Latvian Jew. And finally, concurrently to the coup d'etat, which I will mention immediately, in May 1934, actually the activity of the boycott committee was prohibited by the state, by the authorities, and it ceased to exist, and the boycott ended at this point in Latvia. But here, one more very interesting point, especially Ilya, if you see and hear as a now, so please put your attention to the address of this meeting dedicated to the boycott in the world, to the Jewish boycott and its outcomes in the world. It was held in the beginning of 1934 in Skolas Yela number 6, which is your current address of your community house and also of the museum, the Jews in Latvia. A very interesting finding in this archival file. So going back to the coup d'etat, which was performed by Karlis Ulmanis in May, as you can see here, May 1934. It was quite a quiet coup, unbloody coup, and actually, I wouldn't like to go into details right now, since this is a completely different story. But the only thing that I would like to stress is that the main body of the prosecution after the coup d'etat fell on the heads of the left-wing parties, and especially social democrats, and some of these people were even arrested and detained for a while. Some of the right-wing activists like Telminch from Perkonkrust were also detained and held for even some years in the prison. But actually, the Jewish community, which is very interesting, wasn't harmed, wasn't almost touched by this event. And people like, you can see here, Mordechai Dubin, for example, one of the biggest leaders of the community by this period of time, they actually continue to be very active, and some of them, like Dubin, quite close to the leader, to Ulmanis by this time. So, and it is very interesting, since you also can see it in the same specific archival file of the political department. The newspapers, the Jewish newspapers, continued to be published, at least some of them. Here, for example, you can see one of them, Hind, published in Yiddish in Riga and spread across the country. So they were published, but also monitored by the political department. So different issues of this and other newspapers were stored in this specific file. And I guess it was done for the purposes of monitoring the community and its publications in Yiddish. The second here, the next slide shows the monitoring of correspondence of the local community and also of the local Zionist organizations, which continued to be active in Latvia by this period of time. This continuity has not been stopped by the authorities, but again was very close, as far as I understand, monitored by the political department. And here, for example, we can see the correspondence, a telegram sent from, as far as I understand, from Warsaw, probably by the Beitar. Against Beitar was a youth organization of the revisionist Zionist movement, world revisionist Zionist movement. So here you can see the telegram sent by them from their new headquarters in Warsaw to their comrades in Riga. And it was intercepted, like some other telegrams stored in the same archival file. They were intercepted by the political department, as you can see here, Politiskaya Parvalde, and the department was trying to understand what's going on exactly within these correspondence. What exactly are they writing and talking about? But again, we have to stress that this activity had not been stopped or interrupted by, as far as I understand, yes, by the authorities. The next slide, let's go there. speaks. Here we have another telegram, this time from Jerusalem, from the headquarters of the Jewish agency, as you can see here, Jew agency. And they are talking here, they're writing about the so-called Chalutzim, young guys who were supposed to come, as I understand here, from Latvia to Palestine, this time under the British mandate. So they were discussing the so-called certificates, which the British were giving for the people who wanted to come to Palestine. The certificate means permissions, specific permissions to come to make aliyah, as we call this in Hebrew, to come to Israel today, but by this time, as I said, to a British mandatory Palestine. So this telegram also came to Riga, was intercepted by the political department and read by it. But again, the very activity of these organizations or the Zionists, as far as I understand, it wasn't interrupted. Here we are witnessing actually a very funny story, since this is a kind of letter or kind of text which was used, as far as I understand, for learning Hebrew in Latvia. It is actually a lesson in Hebrew about a river creature called in English eel, and in Hebrew it's lofach narot. And as I understand, as I can understand here, it probably looked suspicious for the guys from the political department. So they also intercepted this a piece of text, and they probably tried to translate it. Anyway, it was also stored in the same archival file that I'm talking about. But the text actually was completely innocent. As I said, it was a kind of text used for learning Hebrew, by this time in Latvia. Here, for example, we have one of many reports sent by the local citizens, Jews and also not Jews, Latvians, Russians. So these reports were written in different languages, actually in 3 languages, or in 2 at least, yeah, in Latvian, no, 3, Latvian, yes, Russian and German for some reason. So different citizens were trying to inform the political department about different allegedly suspicious activities of different Jewish organizations across the country. And as far as I understood, the political department was reading these reports, was stockpiling them, but I saw no reactions, actually, at least in this specific archival file, which survived until today, and which I saw. We see no actual reactions, only different such reports coming from different parts, mainly from Riga, but also from other parts of the country. Speaking about the people and organizations which were nonetheless hurt by the coup d'etat of Ulmanis, as I said, they mostly belong to the left-wing organizations in Latvia. And one of these organizations proved to be so-called Poalei Zion, a Jewish left-wing or center-left, I would call it, organization, which was active in Latvia. And here you can see one of its leaders by the time, whose name was Max or Moisei or Moishe, earlier probably Lazarson. He was a very interesting person. He was born outside Latvia, and he made a very nice career in Russia prior to his coming, or to his escape to the West and coming to Latvia in the mid-20s from the Soviet Russia. And quite quickly afterwards, he became a local Latvian politician and also was a member of the Latvian parliament, Saima. So he became a quite well-known person in the interwar Latvian politics. He was arrested uh, after the coup, after the Ulmanis coup, and put in a camp near Liepāja, but afterwards released from his cell and actually compelled to leave the country, firstly to Palestine. Here in Palestine, future Israel, he participated vividly in establishment of the Tel Aviv University, which is today my university also. And afterwards, he moved to the US and actually became a professor there. He was a lawyer, by the way, and financist, and a gifted one. And he passed away in, as far as I can recall, in the mid 50s. But here, actually, he was connected to the Latvian political history, and he was arrested. And you can see here different, or at least a few such reports that I was talking about earlier, which was actually or were dedicated to him personally and were sent by a different. Can you hear me now? Since I see that my internet is unstable, because I
Yeah,
think for
everything's
this
fine.
thunderstorm, everything is fine. Okay, thank you very much. So different people were saying he looked suspicious to them because of his left-wing activity during the 30s, early 30s, prior to the coup d'etat. And I found a few reports by different citizens sent to the political department about his allegedly suspicious activities in Latvia and calls to check him and his activity of him, of course, and his comrades in Poale Zion. Another very interesting phenomenon that I found in the file was the monitoring, as you can see, Uziņamin's report, the monitoring of Latvian Jewish citizens who were refused entry to the British mandate. As we already mentioned, Palestine, would-be Israel, by this time was still in the hands of the British, and they were trying to limit the entrance of the Jews from abroad to this specific place in order not to antagonize too much the local Arab community. So they gave, issued certificates to different people, a very limited number of such certificates per year. So many, especially young people from abroad and also from Latvia, were trying to enter, nonetheless, to enter Palestine on their own without those certificates. And many of them were caught. Also, those who came from Latvia were caught by the British authorities and sent back to their countries. And also some of them came to Latvia again. And I saw no applies or requests by the British to the political department, but the very fact that these guys were monitored by the political department probably can tell us that there were some requests by the British to put an eye on these specific guys, not to allow their new attempts to come again to Palestine without the certificates. So we are witnessing, as I said, this very interesting phenomenon in the archival file of the political department. One more interesting phenomenon which I discovered there was reports written again by the local citizens. Some of them, as far as I understood, were Jews who were reporting about their friends or neighbors or others who allegedly were trying to smuggle money to Palestine. So the people were trying not only to come to Palestine without the certificates, but they also, those of them who were able to do this, who had some sum of money, were trying to smuggle it to Palestine without the permission of the British. And again, in this case also, we can see a series of reports to the political department about such people and the requests to monitor them closely, since they are trying to make something against the local laws. Uh, to continue this subject, one more interesting fact that I found in this file was a series of reports about the activity of this guy, Rabbi Levi Lichtenstein, who was, as far as I understand, the chief rabbi of Tukums, and a small town near the Riga Gulf. And there was a small community, but it appears in the file that not so few Jewish young people were coming to Tukums to Rabbi Levi Lichtenstein to arrange false marriages, and for which purpose we know that the mentioned certificates which the British gave or issued per year, they were given to a single person. But a married couple was allowed to enter Palestine under the same certificate. So in order to be able to to enter more people, more young Jewish people to Palestine, such marriages had been arranged in different places, not only in Latvia, not only in Tukums, but also in other places in Latvia. And also we know this phenomenon from Poland, for example. And here, when I started to lecture, to talk about my findings in Hebrew here in Israel, I was sent these very fruitful, very helpful remarks by my audience from Israel, who wrote me that, yes, they already came across the same phenomenon in Tukums while looking into the local Jewish documents. And it appears that indeed in Tukums by this time, multiple young Jewish couples were coming to this place in order to arrange their false marriages and then to proceed to Palestine. So again, this phenomenon had been monitored by the political department, but we do not know about the outcomes, about the activity which was undertook after getting these reports. Probably there was some another operative files, but I haven't seen them, unfortunately, in the Latvian state archives. And another, after the story of the Jewish economic boycott against the German goods, another, I would call it big story, which I found in the file, is related to this very sad event in June 1938. A member, an activist, and actually a fighter of the same Beitar organization, which was, as I said, established in Riga in 1923. So the organization had many branches later on in Poland and in other European countries and in North America, but also in Israel. And many of its members, then when came to Palestine, to British Palestine, they continued to be active within the organization. And one of such members, called Shlomo Ben Yosef, who was involved in certain activities against the Arabs in Palestine, was caught by the British, and as you can see here, killed by them in June 1938. The British published before the execution that he will be executed, actually, and this became a very well-known fact, and there were multiple demonstrations against the British plan to execute Shlomo ben Yosef in Palestine, but the British gave not up and actually murdered him. And in this specific day, 29th June 1938, a big demonstration, according to the documents of the Latvian political department, a big demonstration took place next to the British embassy on Alunana Street number 5, which also still exists, the street itself and the embassy. I didn't know this fact and actually went there the last August after having read the file and its documents, and after encountering this specific report about this demonstration against the British embassy, and that some windows were broken by the demonstrants who were throwing blocks, stones to those windows. So I went there, and to my astonishment, I discovered that the British embassy is still located in the same place on Alunana Street number 5. So I filmed it, yes, but the fact is very interesting. We know for sure, I haven't seen information about such demonstrations, the not so peaceful demonstrations in other places across Europe, but here in Riga, as I said already, the Beitar movement was very active, very powerful, and it had multiple activists who wanted to demonstrate against this act by the British in Palestine. So they came to this place next to the embassy. They broken the windows of the embassy, and the entire matter was delivered not to the regular police, but rather to the political department, since they, as far as I understand, foreign representatives were involved in this matter, and the embassy, the British embassy, suffered, as I said, broken windows, etc., etc. So the political department was ordered to intervene and to check the entire case. Actually, we have a few documents dedicated to this event, and in the end, again, here are only the outcomes of this checking, but no measures mentioned. So again, I guess that probably there must have been another file, operative file, which stockpiled information about the measures taken after the investigation. But here, at least, we have this information about the event itself, which again, I'm stressing, was very interesting, quite unique, and about the investigation undertaken by the political department. And in the end of the process, unfortunately, as most of us know, in June 1940, the Latvian state ceased to exist and was occupied by the Soviets after about a year after the agreement between the Soviets and the Nazi Germany. And the Soviets entered, and this guy called Alphonse Noviks, who previously was a prisoner in Latvia, political prisoner in Latvia, and a client of the political department, now became the NKVD chief of the entire country, of the entire security apparatus, security and terror apparatus, political terror apparatus imposed by the Soviets in the country. And here you can see also the headquarters of this organization, of the first of the NKVD and later on of the KGB, throughout the entire Soviet period until the downfall of the Soviet Union and withdrawal of the Russians from Latvia in 1991. This was the place, a very notorious place known to most of the Latvians and of course of the citizens of Riga. So the Soviets imposed their own rules on the local citizens, and they were arresting the local elites, arresting, and some of these people caught by the Soviets were even murdered by them or sent to the prisoners to prisons to the camps of Gulag in Siberia and other places across the Soviet Union. And of course, the president, leader of the Latvian state, Karlis Ulmanis, paid by his own life somewhere in 1942. And the the second director of the political department, Yanis Friedrichsons Krauja, who managed this organization since 1934, was also arrested and detained, interrogated by the Soviets, and died in 1941. But we have to stress the fact that the Jewish community suffered a lot. Many of these communities' leaders were also arrested by the occupying authorities. And the person which I already mentioned today, who was quite close to Ulmanis, Mordechai Dubins, a Latvian politician and a leader, as I said, of the local Jewish community, a religious leader, he was also detained and sent to Russia, and he tragically passed away already after the Second World War in 1957. And the less known fact is that also the representative, the leader of the Beitar movement in Latvia, Estonia, and Finland, David Varhavtik, also was caught, arrested by the Soviets, interrogated, and sent to one of the Gulag camps. But he managed to survive the war and the detention, and came back to Latvia and later on also to Israel. But this was quite a unique story of success. Many other members, activists of Beitar were arrested by the Soviets and imprisoned, and others died during the German occupation in Latvia. So that's it, I think. Yes, again, I would like to stress that I was trying to present you only the initial findings of these very interesting materials in the Latvian Historical Archive. We still have a very long road to pass, since until today I saw no other files of this same organization in this archive. But probably I will be able. We have very nice archives of different Jewish and Zionist, Latvian Zionist organizations, of course, in Latvia, in the Museum Jews in Latvia, but also here in Israel, in some places. So probably it will be possible to dig into these archives here in Israel, for example, and try to find some testimonies of the Latvian Jews who, luckily to them, were able to come to Israel, or even earlier to Palestine, to British Palestine, and probably they gave us or to other people some testimonies about this period of time in Latvia and their personal encounters with the Latvian security authorities. So there is still a chance, a possibility of finding more materials, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing these the fascinating facts here in Israel and also in Latvia. But one more point that I would like to stress is that actually the relationship between the Latvian state, interwar state security and the local Jewish community wasn't so painful as at least to my opinion, at least according to my understanding. Uh, we can see from this specific file that quite a lot of Jewish citizens were openly writing to the political department, raising different questions, etc., etc. For example, teachers in a Jewish school in Riga who were complaining about different things and so on. So the people obviously were not afraid of this organization. This was not a kind of notorious NKVD in the Soviet Union. This was a security authority well known in the country, but the people were trying to conversate with it, to contact it, to obtain some things from it. So it is a very interesting revelation which was made again in this specific archival file. And yes, by now that's it, I think. So I presented it and I published this revelation already in Hebrew here in Israel, but more publications are very possible in other languages in the future. So yes, thank you very much for your attention and your patience. And now I'm open to possible questions and remarks and supplements, of course, since I haven't touched everything which was possible. So I will be more than thankful for any possible supplements. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yaakov. So we already have a question. So I just want to supplement that you mentioned David Warhaftik was one of the leaders of the Beitar, and later he was imprisoned by the Soviets and he died in Gulag. So his biography and his encounter with Latvian Special Services was actually quite lengthy. So for the first time, I found that he was arrested already in December 1933, and actually also for smashing the windows of British consulate.
Which is interesting. Okay, okay.
Yeah. So and he was arrested together with his colleague Arya Desenchik, who later became a famous Israeli journalist, editor, and leading cultural figure. Ironically, all the newspapers described that the windows were smashed, among other things, by a donation box and by the several ashtrays. And actually, the ashtrays were how it helped to identify the perpetrators, because many people have seen similar ashtrays in the office of the Zionist newspaper Avondpost and Morgenpost. And so Latvian press extensively covered this scandal. So obviously the encounters were very numerous, and also important thing to note, which I think very few of our listeners know of, and unfortunately me neither, and to my knowledge almost none of our colleagues except for historian Insa Dreimane dipped into it. In 1940 and 1941, several Jews were arrested and deported on the accusation of being the political department agents or informers. Yeah, so not only people, regular people were not afraid to communicate with political department, but actually some of these people, it seems, were quite deeply connected with them and found it absolutely normal. Yeah, so as we can presume, the Ulmist regime, let's say, security concerns about the Jews were maybe smaller than about other groups, but still the Jews needed supervision. And obviously the supervisors could be recruited only from among the Jews, yeah, which was not the case with other ethnic groups, yeah, but here there was a language barrier, and it would be interesting to continue research also in this way. Okay, so now we have the first question. Eli Valk, the chairman of Association of Latvian and Estonian Jews in Israel, and also the association's archives, holds, I think, many interesting materials on the topic. Eli, please.
Yes.
But first of all, excuse me, Eli, thank you very much, Ilya, for this supplementation, yeah, which is very interesting and fruitful, and yeah, and I will be happy to dig into this story later on. Okay, so please, Eli.
Eli?
Excuse
Yeah. Now I imagine that Yaakov knows about the book, a big, not a book, an register of arrivals from Latvia, which can be found in the Central Zionist Archive in Jerusalem. And I'm relating to this because you mentioned the fictive marriages. So my mother arrived in Israel also on the fictitious marriage to somebody. And when in 1950s, not the Parval, but real KGB from the same Sturmnama, when they wanted to interrogate my mother, they turned to her under the name which she obtained when through the fixed marriage. So they were digging into the archives and probably using them. This is the first thing. The other one is that our archive in Shfaim, which is not in Kibbutz Shfaim, which is wrongly mentioned usually, but in the educational center Shfaim, we do have about 4,500 pictures, photos. I'm not sure that we have too much documents about this period of time, but most of them are shared with the Central Archive of Beit Jabotinsky, which we are very close cooperating. And also, you mentioned David Barhaftik. David's brother was active in Lehi, and David's brother was working in the Israeli embassy in Moscow in the 50s. So you see, your lecture is covering a period of rather expanded period of our history. Thank you, Yaakov.
Okay, thank you very much, Eli. And of course, I know you possess a very nice, very unique collection of documents. And I have an intention to visit you very soon and to try to find also there are some things related to this specific interwar period of time in Latvia. Thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions? Please feel free, because the story or stories actually Yaakov is sharing are quite unique, and I'm not sure that there are many people who can discuss these issues, so please use this possibility.
Probably from our Latvian colleagues, something about the political department and its attitude towards the minorities in Latvia. Not also, I know in this specific book edited by Kanepe, there were also chapters dedicated to their activity vis-a-vis the German local community and also the Belarusian community. So yeah, they were quite busy during this period of time. But as you mentioned, Ilya, rightly, they pose no very big threat to the Latvian independence. They were not very tightly connected to the Soviets or to the Germans. So yes, the primary concern by the political department was actually the existence of the quite big Russian community in Latvia, and also by the existence of the big and powerful German community, very well connected to the Third Reich. Yeah, so the Jews were in a better position in Latvia by this time.
I think it's important that also to the extent I went a little bit through some of these documents a while ago, we see that actually the political police was not concerned with the issue of the Jewish involvement in the communist movement. Yeah, so what we know of a long existing myth of Jews being fervent communists, so it seems that for Latvian political police, it was not a primary concern. I mean, in early 20s, they would be strongly monitoring all kind of Jewish left-wing organizations, many of which indeed were connected with the Soviets, but it seems that in the 30s, they did not see it as their primary concern, and so they were looking for a hotbed of communist movement, not within the Jewish circles. We have a comment in the chat. Yeah, so we have thank yous, and then we have a comment from Paula Opperman, who, I don't know, Yaakov, if you know Paula. So she wrote her PhD and defended her PhD thesis on Perkon crusts during and after the Second World War, and she worked extensively. So I'll read. The political department had the local fascists under surveillance, and in these files, some reports note clashes between Jewish and Latvian youth. I would be happy to share those if you are interested.
Okay,
and,
very interesting
and
insight.
Paul is on the train now, that's why she's
okay. So
rather than speaking.
Okay, so I'd like to thank her very much. Okay, so the idea is not to go only exclusively to the so-called Jewish file, but also to see into the German or Nazi files, which is okay, very nice and fruitful idea. Thank you very much. Yeah, I would like to see those things. And I would like to add something to previous words. Not only the Jews, many Jews in Latvia and Riga were not connected to the communists. We can see in this specific Jewish file that some of them, or even quite many of them, were trying to report the political department about the activities of the communists and of the Jewish communists in Latvia. Yeah, so this was the actual situation by this time. The actual attitude of the many members of the Jewish community to these activities by the communists in the country.
Yeah, I think also there obviously you know, but I just want to remind to some of our guests that there is a great resource, the periodica.lv portal maintained by Latvia's National Library, and they are scanning the newspapers and generally periodicals from the era, which obviously also gives an enormous amount of information, and particularly it helps to cover the period when for which there is no documents from the political department collections. So this is also a very interesting source. And the best thing is that last year they've also started scanning and posting their Yiddish newspapers. And there are plans to digitize at least leading in their entirety leading Jewish periodicals from 1920s and 1930s. Yeah, so it would be a great resource for all the researchers who can read mostly Yiddish, but also I think maybe some Hebrew periodicals would be scanned. And also, of course, many articles on these topics were published by a Russian language newspaper, Сегодня, which was owned and edited by Jewish businessmen. And particularly, Сегодня was extensively involved in the boycott campaign, and they would publish the kind of blacklists of companies trading German goods and so on. So this is also a great resource for those of you who want to start digging deeper in it immediately. Yeah, so you can just start with, I think already April 1933, there would be some articles discussing the issue of boycott.
Excuse me, some of these articles have been stored by the political department in the same Jewish file. So they are there. I have their copies or photographs here at home. Yeah, you're completely right. And also they were monitoring the anti-Semitic press in Latvia by this time. In order to be able to find possible future problems ahead of the event, which was very important in order to be able to prevent possible, as you mentioned, clashes between the Nazis and the Jewish activists. So those publications were also stored in this specific Jewish file by the political department.
Yeah, and of course, then we can mention that actually anti-Semitic publications, the major ones like Latvis, a leading anti-Semitic periodical, but also smaller ones like Tautas Vairogs, are also very interesting sources because they were obsessed, really obsessed with Jews. So they would closely monitor the activities of the Jewish communities. And sometimes they, I mean, among all the ocean of anti-Semitic nonsense and canards they would be publishing, they would also have some valuable facts, or rather bridges and, you know, kind of links to facts and events. And so if you're researching that, this is also something worth looking at. Okay,
Yeah,
so
you're completely right.
if there are no questions or kind of major comments on the lecture, so we have a lengthier comment here. You can, Yaakov, you can see about the current Jewish identity in Latvia today and to the extent how society perceives it. So if there are no questions, we probably then would end our today's event. So the recording will be available on the YouTube of the Museum Jews in Latvia, maybe in 1 week's time. And please forward it to your friends and colleagues who maybe could not join us today. We also understand that we had a little bit too complicated system of registration for the event, so we presume that some people didn't manage to join us because of these technical complications. So we sincerely apologize, and we will try to fix it for our future events. So thank you so much, everybody. And
Thank you very much for inviting me today. Thank you.
yeah,
Ilya.
thank you so much. We're looking forward, Yaakov, at meeting you someday in person when you come to Riga to do more
Very
research.
much looking forward to it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so if any of our listeners today have any questions, can they write to you?
Definitely.
Can we share? Yeah, so if
definitely.
someone is interested, you can ask us, and we'll share Dr. Falkov's email. So please attend also our events. We'll have many more events this year, online and hopefully offline. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.